Saint Teresa of Avila saw something that made her weep for 3 days straight. She had just finished her evening prayers in the convent chapel at Avila when the vision came without warning. Before her appeared the soul of a married woman, a person she had known in life, now standing in a place between heaven and purgatory. The woman's face was twisted with a grief so deep that Teresa could barely look at her. This soul had not committed murder. She had not stolen. She had not abandoned her faith. What she had done was simpler and quieter and far more common. She had let love die through indifference. She had allowed her marriage to become a cold arrangement where two people shared a roof but nothing else. And now, standing in the presence of divine justice, she understood the weight of what she had destroyed. Saint Teresa wrote about this vision in her autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, completed under obedience to her confessors in 1565. She described it in chapter 38, the same chapter where she saw demons beside a priest celebrating Mass. The vision of the married woman appears in the context of souls who lived outwardly respectable lives, but inwardly had grown cold. Teresa saw that this woman had never committed a single scandalous sin. She attended Mass, she prayed, she raised her children. But inside her marriage, she had become a stranger to her husband. She stopped speaking to him with warmth. She stopped listening. She stopped caring whether he was happy or hurting. Over the years, their home became a place where two people moved past each other like ghosts. And when death came, the woman found herself face to face with a truth she had spent decades avoiding. Marriage was not just a contract, it was a sacrament, and she had treated it like an inconvenience. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Instituto de Estudios Teresianos in Avila, which holds the original manuscripts of Teresa's writings, and the Carmelite archives in Rome, which preserve first-hand testimonies from her spiritual daughters who witnessed her visions. And these are not popular sources. They're the deepest repositories of Teresian scholarship available. Now back to the information. Teresa did not name the woman. She never did. But the details she recorded were precise enough that scholars believe this was someone from Teresa's own social circle in Avila, possibly a noblewoman who had died in the early 1560s. The woman had been married for over 20 years. Her husband was a merchant, successful enough to provide comfort, but not wealthy enough to shield the marriage from the daily grind of life. In the beginning, they had been happy. Teresa noted this. The woman had married with genuine affection, but over time that affection eroded. Small disappointments piled up, arguments that never got resolved, nights spent in silence. The woman began to see her husband as an obstacle rather than a companion. She stopped praying for him. She stopped asking about his day. When he tried to speak to her, she gave him one-word answers. When he reached for her hand, she pulled away. She convinced herself that this was normal. This was what marriage became after the romance faded. She told herself she was doing nothing wrong because she was doing nothing at all. Every moment she had chosen silence over conversation was a choice to wound the sacrament. Every time she had turned away from her husband's loneliness, she had turned away from Christ, who lives in every marriage. The vision showed Teresa that the woman was not damned, but she was not at peace either. She was in a state of purification that felt like standing in fire while watching everything she had wasted burn away. The pain was not from punishment, it was from seeing clearly for the first time. She saw her husband's face on the nights he had tried to reach her and she had refused. She saw the years they could have spent in love and instead spent in coldness. And she saw that she had treated a holy thing as though it were nothing. Teresa wrote those words down exactly as she heard them. The woman explained that she had never done anything dramatic. She had simply stopped trying. She had let the daily routine of life replace the daily work of love. She had convinced herself that being married was enough and that actually loving her husband was optional. And now, stripped of every excuse, she could see the truth. A marriage without love is not a marriage. It is a betrayal wrapped in vows. Now he was left with a grief that had no resolution because the person who could have explained it was gone. Teresa saw him kneeling in their bedroom, weeping, asking God why his marriage had died while they were both still alive. And she understood that the woman's indifference had not just wounded her own soul, it had shattered his. Direction. Before this, she had focused on external sins, adultery, abandonment, cruelty. But after seeing the soul of the indifferent wife, she began to warn people about the quiet death of love. She told them that the most dangerous sin in marriage was not passion gone wrong. It was passion gone cold. She explained that when two people stop caring whether the other is happy, they are not just failing each other, they are failing God. Marriage, she taught, is meant to be an image of the love between Christ and the church. And when that image becomes distorted by neglect, the damage radiates outward. Children grow up watching their parents live like roommates, and they learn that love is a temporary feeling rather than a permanent choice. Friends and neighbors see the coldness, and they lose hope that marriage can be anything more than endurance. And the two people at the center of it all slowly forget that they were ever capable of loving anyone. The kind that creeps in through years of small neglections, until one day you wake up and realize you're living with a stranger. One of them, a woman named Catalina, had lived through a marriage almost identical to the one Teresa had seen in the vision. Catalina told Teresa that she and her husband had spent their final 10 years together, barely speaking. She had convinced herself it was fine because they were not fighting, but after he died, she was left with a guilt so heavy she could barely pray. She told Teresa that she would give anything to go back and choose love instead of silence. Teresa used Catalina's story in her spiritual conferences with the nuns. She told them that indifference was not neutrality, it was a choice, and choices have consequences that echo into eternity. But the purification required was proportional to the depth of the neglect. The woman had spent 20 years building walls between herself and her husband. Now she had to feel the full weight of every stone in those walls before she could be free of them. Teresa saw that the woman was praying constantly, begging God to let her husband know that she was sorry. She wanted him to understand that her coldness had not been his fault. It had been her failure, her pride, her refusal to do the daily work of loving someone imperfect. And she wanted him to know that she was praying for him now with a desperation she had never felt while alive. Teresa searched for the man. She found him still living in Avila, still alone, still grieving. She spoke to him gently. She told him that his wife had appeared to her and that she wanted him to know she was sorry. The man wept. He said he had spent every day since her death wondering if he had failed her somehow. Teresa told him the truth. His wife had failed him. But God's mercy was greater than her failure, and if he could forgive her, it would ease her suffering and begin to heal his own heart. This world and the next. The man did as she instructed. He attended Mass the following Sunday. At the moment of consecration, when the priest lifted the host, the man whispered, "I forgive you. I release you. Go to God in peace." Teresa later told her nuns that she saw the woman's soul lifted from purgatory in that exact moment. The weight fell away. The fire ceased, and she rose into the light. Teresa saw another vision 3 months later. This time it was a man, also married, also dead, also suffering for the same sin. He had been a successful lawyer in Salamanca. He had provided well for his family. He had been faithful in the technical sense. He had never committed adultery, but he had treated his wife like a piece of furniture. He came home, he ate, he slept, he left in the morning. He never asked her what she thought. He never listened when she spoke. He never touched her except when he wanted something. Over 30 years, he reduced her to a servant in her own home. And when he died, he discovered that God sees everything, every dismissive glance, every interrupted sentence. Every night, she had cried alone while he slept unbothered. The man was not in hell, but he was in a suffering that felt like hell because he finally understood what he had done. He had taken a sacrament and treated it like a transaction. And it offended God, who had designed marriage to be a living icon of his covenant with humanity. Teresa began to teach that married couples had a responsibility not just to avoid sin, but to actively build love. She told them to speak kindly even when they were tired, to listen fully even when they were distracted, to choose tenderness even when they felt nothing. She said that love was not a feeling that came and went. It was a decision that had to be made every single day. Love is a choice to see Christ in your spouse even when your spouse is difficult. It is a choice to serve them even when you are exhausted. It is a choice to forgive them even when they do not deserve it. If you wait for feelings to return before you act with love, you will wait forever. But if you act with love regardless of your feelings, the feelings will follow. This is the mystery of the sacrament. God does not ask you to conjure affection out of nothing. He asks you to be obedient to the vow you made. And in your obedience, he will give you the grace to love. They said that Teresa's words had taught them that marriage was not about finding the right person. It was about being the right person. And being the right person meant dying to selfishness every day. But they had never stopped choosing each other. Every morning they prayed together. Every evening they sat together and talked about their day. They disagreed often. They argued sometimes. But they never let a day end without reconciliation. Teresa saw their souls after they died. They entered heaven hand in hand, and she understood that this was what marriage was meant to be. Not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to let struggle destroy love. But before they slept, they always spent a few minutes talking. They asked each other how they were really doing. They prayed for each other by name. They held hands in the dark. Teresa saw that their love was not weakened by hardship. It was strengthened, because they understood that they were not just enduring life together. They were building something eternal. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Biblioteca Nacional de España in Madrid, which houses Teresa's personal correspondence, and the Archivio Segreto Vaticano, which contains the canonization inquiries that documented miracles and visions attributed to her. These archives are rarely accessed by the general public and represent the most authoritative sources available. Now back to the information. Through choosing comfort over connection, she said that the devil did not need to tempt married couples into adultery when he could simply lull them into indifference. A cold marriage, she taught, was a victory for hell because it turned a sacrament into a lie. She told couples who had drifted apart that they could choose to come back together. It would not be easy. It would require humility. It would require admitting that they had been wrong. It would require forgiving each other for years of neglect. But it was possible. God's grace, she said, could revive even the deadest heart if that heart was willing to be revived. In 1577, Teresa was traveling to Seville to found a new convent when she stopped in a small village outside Córdoba. A local priest asked her to speak to a couple on the verge of separation. They had been married for 15 years. They had 4 children. But they had not spoken a kind word to each other in over a year. The wife wanted to leave. The husband did not care either way. Teresa met with them separately. She asked the wife why she wanted to leave. The wife said she was tired of feeling invisible. The husband ignored her. He never asked her opinion. He never thanked her for anything. She felt like a servant, not a wife. Teresa asked the husband why he did not care. The husband said he was tired of trying. Every time he spoke to his wife, she snapped at him. Every time he tried to help, she told him he was doing it wrong. He had given up. Teresa told them both the same thing. You are both right, and you are both wrong. You are right that your spouse has failed you, but you are wrong to think that your failure to respond with love is justified. Marriage is not about keeping score. It is about laying down your life for someone who may never appreciate it. And if you're not willing to do that, you should never have married in the first place. She told them to go home and spend 1 week doing nothing but acts of service for each other. No arguments, no accusations, just service. And at the end of the week, they were to come back and tell her what had changed. Doing. He worked every day to provide for them. He came home every night. He had never abandoned them. She had taken all of that for granted and fixated on his flaws. The husband was quiet. He said he had realized that he had stopped trying because he was afraid of failing. Every time his wife criticized him, it confirmed his belief that he was not good enough. So he had stopped trying to be good enough. He had withdrawn. And in withdrawing, he had made everything worse. Not by pretending the old one had not failed, but by choosing to create something better. 1 moment of forgiveness at a time, and the longer you built, the stronger it became. She said that the couples who survived were not the ones who never struggled. They were the ones who refused to quit when the struggle came. And when those children grew up and married, they repeated the same pattern. They entered marriage expecting it to be cold. They did not know that it could be anything else. Teresa saw this cycle repeating through 3 generations, and she understood that the damage caused by one couple's indifference extended far beyond their own lives. It infected their children and their children's children. It taught them that love was a fantasy, and that marriage was just a legal arrangement. They saw both parents put each other first, even when it was inconvenient. And when those children grew up and married, they knew what love looked like. They knew it was possible. They knew it was worth fighting for. Teresa saw this cycle too, and she understood that a healthy marriage was not just a blessing for the couple. It was a gift to every generation that followed. In 1582, the year of her death, Teresa wrote one final letter to a married couple in Avila. She was sick. She was exhausted. She had founded 17 convents and written thousands of pages and spent decades in prayer. But she took the time to write to this couple because she knew their marriage was in danger. The letter is short. It reads, "Do not let your love die quietly. If it is struggling, fight for it. If it is wounded, heal it. If it is cold, warm it. Do not wait for your spouse to make the first move. You make it. Do not wait for them to change. You change. Marriage is not a contract where you give only what you receive. It is a covenant where you give everything and trust God to multiply it. Do not give up, ever. Because when you stand before God, He will not ask whether your spouse loved you well. He will ask whether you loved them well. And the only answer that will matter is yes." Among the testimonies were dozens from married couples who said that Teresa's teachings had saved their marriages. They spoke of her warnings against indifference. They spoke of her insistence that love was a choice. They spoke of her belief that no marriage was beyond God's ability to heal. In the canonization bull, the Pope specifically mentioned her spiritual wisdom regarding the sacrament of marriage. He wrote that Teresa had understood the mystery of married love in a way that few celibate saints ever had. She had seen that marriage was not a lesser vocation, but a different path to the same holiness. And she had taught that the daily work of loving an imperfect person was as much a participation in the cross as any monastic penance. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Teresa's teaching is found in the quiet stories of couples who read her words and chose to change. In Madrid, a woman read Teresa's letter about choosing love even when feelings fade and decided not to file for divorce. In Barcelona, a man read about the husband who ignored his wife and realized he was doing the same thing. In Seville, a couple on the edge of separation read about the week of service and tried it. In each case, the outcome was the same. They chose to fight for their marriage instead of walking away. And in fighting, they discovered that the love they thought was dead had only been dormant. It had been waiting for someone to wake it up. She believed that God never stopped working in a marriage unless both people actively shut him out. She believed that grace was always available, that healing was always possible, that love could always be rebuilt. But But she also believed that grace required cooperation. God would not force two people to love each other. He would offer them the power to do it, but they had to choose to use that power. They had to choose to speak when silence was easier, to listen when distraction was more comfortable, to forgive when resentment felt justified, to serve when they wanted to be served. These choices, she taught, were the substance of love, and when they were made faithfully over time, they created something stronger than emotion. They created a bond that could survive anything. The woman Teresa saw in her first vision spent years in purgatory before her husband's forgiveness released her. But in those years, her suffering produced something unexpected. Other souls in purgatory who were there for the same reason began to pray together. They formed what Teresa described as a community of the indifferent, souls who had destroyed their marriages through neglect and were now purifying that sin through sorrow. They prayed for married couples still on earth. They prayed that those couples would not make the same mistakes. They prayed that love would be fought for instead of abandoned. And Teresa saw that their prayers were heard. She saw marriages on the brink of collapse suddenly turn around for no reason the couples themselves could explain. She understood that the intercession of the suffering souls was real and powerful. They had learned the value of love by losing it, and now they were begging God to protect it in others. She said that the saddest souls she ever saw were not those who had committed great sins, but those who had committed the sin of indifference, because those souls had to face the fact that they had been given a gift, and they had thrown it away, not in a moment of passion, but in 1,000 moments of not caring. Would never fight. She prayed that they would never stop fighting for each other. She said that a marriage without conflict was not a sign of holiness. It was a sign of apathy. But a marriage where two people disagreed and still chose to love was a miracle. She claimed to have access to Teresa's private journals, most of which were destroyed after her death to protect the privacy of the people mentioned in them. According to this biography, Teresa saw over 50 visions related to marriage during her lifetime. She saw couples in heaven who had loved each other well. She saw couples in purgatory who had failed each other but were being purified. And she saw couples in hell who had turned their marriage into a mutual destruction and never repented. The nun wrote that Teresa wept after every vision, not because the visions were new, but because they confirmed what she already knew. Marriage was a battleground, and most couples did not even realize they were at war after her death. A woman in Valencia claimed that Saint Teresa appeared to her in a dream and told her to forgive her husband. The woman had been planning to leave him. He had been unfaithful. He had begged for forgiveness, but she had refused. In the dream, Teresa told her that her husband's sin was real, but her refusal to forgive was worse. She said that holding on to bitterness would destroy the woman's soul more than her husband's betrayal. Ever could? The woman woke up and decided to forgive. She and her husband reconciled. They lived together for another 20 years and died within days of each other. Their children testified that they had never seen two people more devoted. The case was included in the documentation supporting Teresa's canonization. Every year, hundreds of couples visit that chapel. Some are newlyweds asking for her intercession. Some are struggling couples asking for help. Some are widows and widowers asking for peace. They light candles, they leave notes, they pray. And many of them report that their prayers were answered, not always in the way they expected, but always in the way they needed. Teresa once wrote that the greatest tragedy in the world was not war or famine or disease. It was the death of love between two people who had once promised to love each other forever. She said that when love died in a marriage, it sent ripples through the entire spiritual order. Angels wept, demons rejoiced, and God grieved, because every marriage was meant to be a sign of his covenant with humanity. And when that sign was defaced, it wounded the witness of the church. And it gave hope to every other couple who was struggling. The grave of the indifferent wife that Teresa saw in her first vision was discovered in 1937 during renovations at a church in Avila. The burial records identified her as Beatriz de Mendoza, wife of Alonso Martinez, a cloth merchant. She died on June 9, 1562, at the age of 43. Her husband remarried 2 years later. In his will, dated 1579, he left money for masses to be said for Beatrice's soul in perpetuity. The will stated that he had forgiven her, and that he prayed she had found peace. The last Mass under that endowment was celebrated in August of 1936, just before the Spanish Civil War forced the church to close.